Hello everyone, Yate, Sheiskar Prinisha, Donin Shinigi A Kiani Nishlin, Tachini Bashishin, Twisi Dashishe do Kiani Dashnala, Gut Ego Tetken Nishlin, Ado Chinale Danasha, Do Drexel University Inishka. Everyone, my name is Sky Harper. I'm a first generation student studying chemistry with a biology and interdisciplinary problem solving minor, as well as being a pre-med student at Drexel University in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I'm the eldest of 6 boys and come from the Navajo Nation. I currently work for the United States Department of Agriculture Research Services, conducting research on food safety, as well as being an on-campus researcher looking at liver cancer. I'm also the founder and president of Drexel Indigenous Students of the Americas, the first Native American serving organization on campus, as well as being an avid DEI advocate. Along with that, I'm also the current U.S. Junior National Student Representative for the American Indian Science and Engineering Society, as well as an American Indian College Fund Student Ambassador, and a Barry Goldwater, Udall Foundation, and Harry S. Truman Scholar. So welcome back to day 2 of our 5th annual Summer Success Conference, Cultivating Connections into Success, hosted by the American Indian College Fund. We hope that all of those who are returning from yesterday enjoyed hearing from our speaker and elder, Phil Twoeagle, as well as our various presenters. And if you are new today, welcome. Today, we will hear from a tribal college and university staff member before moving into another series of rotating breakout sessions. So before we begin, we have a little bit of housekeeping today. If you have any tech issues throughout the day, please let us know in the chat. We have IT on deck who can support any audio or visual problems. And please note the chat button at the bottom of the screen. For more accessibility, you can also toggle on and off the closed captioning by clicking that double CC button. Additionally, some sessions this afternoon will allow you to turn on and off your camera and mic, so please be mindful of that when you're attending those sessions. So with the space that was shared with me today, I want to just briefly offer some advice to everyone as they go about the next stages in their academic or professional career. The biggest insight I can offer as a graduating senior is to be a risk taker and put yourself out there and be your own advocate and find your voice. When I started my undergraduate journey, that was one of the first things I did. I learned to speak up for myself and ask for support. And when someone wasn't able to help me, I would ask somebody else. I would always say thank you and continue to keep up networks because you never know. Along the road, someone may be able to help you. If not now, maybe then. So they say it takes a village no matter where you go in life. And that is true. You're always going to be relying on those around you for support. So like I said, just don't be afraid to talk to people, be a risk taker, and be your own advocate. So now as I move forward, I'd like to welcome Dr. Ruth Plenty Sweetgrass-She, who serves as Food Sovereignty Director at our home tribal college, Nuera Hidatsa Sanish College. So welcome, Dr. Ruth. Thank you.
Thank you. Wow, Sky, you just have an amazing introduction of all the things that you do. I'm thankful for the opportunity to share. So I'm going to share my screen, and I won't be able to see questions, so we'll save those for after, and I'll get started, I think. Okay. So I'm going to share today with you about my professional journey. And as was mentioned, I currently serve as the Food Sovereignty Director for Nueta Hiratsa Sanish College. I also am Senior Research Personnel for the University of Montana. And as I thought about my professional journey, I think part of that has really been to hold power in the system. So thinking about higher education. And fortunately, I've really had a lot of privilege to be able to like the work that I do and feel professional fulfillment. But as I was thinking about this talk today, I also thought about where I would have been if I would have listened to my mom. So my mom always wanted a doctor in the family. So I am a doctor, just not the kind that she wanted. And I have children. So I also think about academia and higher education. And so one of the things that one of my daughter's favorite lines is, weeds are just plants growing in places you find inconvenient. So maybe sometimes I've felt like I was a weed in academia. Maybe I'm an academic weed, but getting back to holding power in the system, professional fulfillment on my own terms. As was mentioned, I'm originally from the Fort Berthold Indian Reservation, so in North Dakota, but I'm also descended from the Fort Peck Sioux and Assiniboine. So here's the border, there's Fort Peck, so we're only about 3 hours apart from each other, the two reservations. I'm enrolled at Fort Berthold, so I'm Hiradza and Mandan. I am from the Mohochari clan, and that's Alkali Lodge. My Hiradza name is grows different. I am also descended from Fort Peck Sioux and Assiniboine, the Red Bottom Band of Assiniboine. But when I did live on Fort Peck, I lived among the Wadopana Band, which is the canoe paddler. My Assiniboine name is Night Wind Woman, and my Dakota name is a family name that was passed down and is Good Woman. So just to give you some context of where I'm from. And then like I mentioned, sometimes we find ourselves in spaces that weren't necessarily meant for us. I am the first generation in my family where we haven't been recently sent to boarding school. So this is from the Hiradza people. And here's my namesake, my great-grandmother, Ruth Packano, and my great-grandfather, Jefferson Smith, who were part of the boarding school history in my family. So her parents, my grandmother Ruth's parents, my grandmother Ruth, my grandmother Frances, and then my aunt all attended boarding school. And so there's my grandmother, Frances. And she was a big influence on my life and really was a strong proponent for education. And she married my grandfather, who was from Fort Peck, and he was he had earned his bachelor's degree from Montana State University, and he was called into the military. He ended up working professionally after the military as a soil conservationist. So I think he was also, even though I never met him, he passed away before I was born. I think that his legacy has influenced some of my journey. So as far as my academic preparation, I graduated from my local high school, and then I spent one brief semester at the University of North Dakota. I transferred back home to, at the time it was Fort Berthold Community College, and I earned associate's degrees in environmental science and associate's degree in elementary education. And then through a collaborative project, I earned my bachelor's degree at my home tribal college, but the degree was through the University of North Dakota. So that was in elementary education. I have my master's in organismal biology and ecology from the University of Montana, where I studied landscape genetics, which was way different than elementary education or environmental, a little bit close to environmental science. And based off of all of those experiences at the tribal college and at the other institutions working in STEM fields, I pursued and earned my PhD in forest and conservation sciences at the University of Montana. And that was, my dissertation was experiences of American Indians in natural resource degree programs. So that's my academic background. Really, I think where I'm at now is largely because of my interest in doing research. And I didn't have a whole lot of experience with research as an undergraduate. My very first experience was at the University of North Dakota when I was required in my introductory psychology class to participate in graduate students' research. So I was a research participant. And then when I transferred back to my home tribal college, I was hired as a student research assistant and participated in various research projects. And a lot of times these research projects were already, the questions, the topics were already developed. And so a lot of times I would be collecting data and doing some of the analysis of the data, but active in the development of the projects. So I was starting to cut my teeth on research. After I completed my bachelor's degree, I returned back to my home tribal college and I worked in the science department. I was half-time research supervisor and then also half-time faculty. Some of the projects that we did at that time were to reestablish Juneberries on the reservation. We were looking at noxious weeds, specifically leafy spurge. So here on the top, we're planting Juneberries. Down here, if you're familiar with leafy spurge, this is a close-up of leafy spurge. And then in the background, you can see the thick leafy spurge and as it's coming out, spreading in the foreground. We also did community tree surveys. We looked at bison and selenium, and then we did a prairie dog population study. So here's a few pictures from the work we did with the bison. So we did collect blood and tissue samples from bison. We collected soil samples as well as plant material to measure the amount of selenium that was going from the soil into the plants and then eventually into the bison. Our community tree survey project was based on we had done several talking circles in different tribal communities. So here's a few quotes. So this was probably my first real experience of kind of participatory action research. So it was the needs had been identified by the community and the things that they wanted to see. So the Juneberry project as well as the community tree surveys were based off of what our community people saw as needs. One of the cool things about being at a tribal college is it's small institution. So this is my older brother. He was one of my students as well as one of my researchers. And this community that this picture is taken in is the community that my grandfather planted probably 90% of the trees. As I mentioned, he passed away before I was born. And so my brother and I were surveying the trees that our grandfather had planted when my mother was a young girl. So that was pretty cool to have that experience. And then down here, this is my son. And so a lot of times my children would go into the field with me and be also part of the research experience. Right around this time is when we saw pharmaceutical companies taking a great interest in one of our traditional medicines, echinacea, and on our reservation, there was a huge pressure of exploitation of our native echinacea populations. And so at that time, the Tribal Business Council, forgive my language, banned anyone from harvesting echinacea, and that hasn't been lifted. That ban hasn't been lifted. So as I shared a little bit of, as I was learning to do research, some of it was as a research student, some of it was supervising the research that we were doing at the tribal college. And one day I had the opportunity, I was going through my email as a faculty member at my tribal college, and there was an email and it said, are you interested in doing research in Costa Rica? Apply for this project. And so I thought, oh my gosh, I would just love to go to a tropical island and to do research. And so I wrote up a proposal, and my proposal was to do a comparative study of natural resource philosophies, practices, and policies of Indigenous peoples, both in Central America as well as the Great Plains. Like I mentioned, the echinacea was one of our traditional plants that was experiencing a lot of outside pressure. And so we were developing policies at that time. So I get down to Costa Rica and I have my children with me, and I realized I was thinking of Puerto Rico, which is the island, not Costa Rica. So we were in Central America. And something I also learned was that sometimes when you're doing research, you have to make shifts in what you're going to do, how you're going to do the research, what the research questions are. I ended up actually completing my research, but it was under a totally different topic. I ended up studying a plant called Heliconia. And so on this side, you see one of the Heliconia plants, and they get the ones I was studying between 5 and 6 feet tall. And I was looking at what are the microorganisms that live inside of this plant. And if you're old enough or familiar with old time outhouses, that's what the water in this plant smells like. It smells like an old time outhouse. Part of the reason my project changed was because I had my children with me, it wasn't going to be feasible for me to travel to all of these communities, and some of them ended up being in Costa Rica and then somewhere in Panama. So we had to make a fast shift in the research topic. So here's a few of the people that I worked with on my research. And again, you see my son. So he, again, has a measuring tape, would go out into the field with me while I was collecting data. After I completed this research, and having that experience of having to shift my research topic, it was kind of a tough pill to swallow, the having to change my project and to work on something that I wasn't really super interested in. And part of my experiences as a student, part of my experiences as the research supervisor, and then my experiences in Costa Rica, all of these were done in a tribal college. And one of the things that I was observing was that when we partnered with other institutions, a lot of times these non-tribal institutions had a inequitable division of the funding. And a lot of times, not only the funding, but a lot of times they selected what was going to be the topic. They selected what were going to be the methods, what were going to be the questions, who was going to be involved. And so they held a lot of power over the research that we were doing at the tribal colleges at that time. And so recognizing that we had the opportunity as an institution to really ask the questions that we wanted, really have control over the funding and how it was used. That was something I felt was really important. And so after my research experience in Costa Rica, I decided that I had only my bachelor's degree at that point, and it was important for me to be able to have the credentials that were needed to be able to serve as a principal investigator on different research grants. So then that would bring back the authority and the power to my institution over our funding and our research topics and research questions and research methods. So I ended up, again, why do we do the research? For me, it was part of it was to have that voice of my community represented in the research. And how do we do the research? So that was, I had a little bit of experience with doing research, but again, like I said, part of that was needing to have advanced credentials. And so that's when I ended up going to the University of Montana. I worked on my master's degree in organismal biology and ecology using landscape genetics to understand the gene flow of American black bears. And that was way different than any of the research that I had done before. I had very little experience in genetics, and it was a huge, steep learning curve for me. I was one of less than 10 Native graduate students on my campus who were pursuing degrees in STEM fields. And, okay, here's the one of the teams that collected data in the Rocky Mountain region for the black bear. So we used non-invasive sampling, and there weren't very many Native people on these field crews. And I also became part of serving on a genetic monitoring working group, and I was the only Native person in this working group. And this was probably a better representation of some diversity. So there was a lot of really super intelligent women that were part of this working group. But a lot of times in my master's program, there weren't as many women represented in the classes and on the different projects. And like I said, very, very few Native people at the institution or participating in some of the research conferences where we would present. So based off of those experiences in my master's program, which were a lot different than at my tribal college, I really started to think about research in a different way. I learned a lot of quantitative methods, and I ended up staying at the University of Montana and working on a PhD. So my PhD is Experiences of American Indians in Natural Resource Degree Programs. And I wanted to understand what was it about these different contexts, both the tribal and non-tribal educational frameworks, and how that influenced Native American students who were earning their degrees in natural resources. While I was doing my literature review, one of the things I came across was a tribal college faculty research model. And I really appreciated coming across this at that time, because the questions, the things that they were discussing in this relatively short document resonated with me and weren't always things that the kinds of questions that people were considering as they were developing their research at my institution. So things that were making sure you were thinking about your community, making sure that you were able to involve and share back, and that it was relevant to my community. I also really enjoyed reading the work of Dr. Gregory Kahete and thinking about native science. So landscape genetics and conservation genetics were way different than what I had been trained in at my home institution. But when I started to read Dr. Kahete's work and thinking about native science, a lot of what he wrote about really resonated with me and my experiences and the way that I was brought up. So both the informal and formal education. And then, of course, as developing my research abilities, part of that was thinking about our different research paradigms. And so reading about what is an Indigenous research methodology, what is an Indigenous epistemology. And I was really thankful to have a lot of remarkable scholars come before me and be able to read their work in the literature. And again, similar to with Dr. Kahete, it really rang true for me, thinking about the way that I understand the world, the way that I think and ask questions. The indigenous epistemology was how I wanted to continue to engage in research. So how do we do research? After I earned my PhD, the first thing I did was, well, one of the first things I did was I worked on a proposal for the University of Montana, and it was to develop an alliance where we were working to increase the number of women, Native American women, who were faculty members in STEM fields. And we ended up getting funded. However, again, one of the things that we don't always anticipate, our program officer said, well, we're going to fund you. However, we want you to change your research focus. We don't believe that there's enough Native American women in STEM fields, so we want you to open it up to all Native American people, self-identified Native American people who are in STEM fields. And so in addition to changing the population of study, we also ended up changing some of the questions that we were asking and the methods that we were using. That has been an interesting project. We've learned a lot, and part of it was just the process of writing the proposal, but also some of the methods. One of our manuscripts that we wrote relatively recently, so 2022, is a 6 R's practice and conceptual framework. So again, building off of a lot of those previous Indigenous scholars' work, thinking about the way we engage in our research, having respect, the importance of relationship, the importance of representation. Again, similar to the tribal college model, that the work that we do is relevant. And as an Indigenous person, the responsibility that we have to our people, as well as to the research that we're doing, and reciprocity. So not just being extractive, but making sure that we're very intentional in this exchange as we conduct our research and as we are scholars in academia. Another thing that we developed in this particular project was an inclusive authorship protocol. So that was based off of the guiding principles of our 6 R's. And what we did was we wanted to make sure that we weren't just being extractive, that we weren't just collecting data from these faculty members, but that we were also including them as authors of any of the dissemination products that we were creating. So there were 4 criteria for participation as a co-author. And if you think about being in academia, a lot of times that's part of your publications are part of how you are evaluated. So that's important to build your CV. And so this was one way we were being inclusive and had some reciprocity to the individuals who participated in our research. When I returned home to my reservation and started working at my institution again, one of the projects that we initiated was a tribal college and university Missouri River Basin Consortium. And so there's Fort Berthold. And if you're not familiar with Fort Berthold, we are one of the dammed Indians. So there's the Garrison Dam, there's the original Missouri River Basin, and then the reservoir that you see since. But one of the, so that's part of our story. And then here is the Missouri River Basin. So really, there's a lot of tribes, a lot of tribal colleges that are within the Missouri River Basin. And previous to this, there hadn't been any formal opportunities for tribal colleges to talk about the research that was happening in our communities related to the Missouri River. And so that was part of the goal of this particular project, was to provide space for us to start talking about what research was being done, what data did we have, did we want to share data, did we want to collaborate on research. So again, thinking back to why was I interested in continuing to learn about doing research, and this was part of it. It's very much centered on our home communities and our lands. So why do we do the research? Well, part of it, like I said, was all those things, but then too, if you're familiar with I think it was Toy Story 3, Trixie, she's like, I have a question. No, wait, I have all the questions. And I think that's part of the nature of things. Part of it is that I want to help to serve my community and my people, but then part of it too is just this natural curiosity. I have lots and lots of questions. I don't have many answers a lot of times, but I sure have a lot of questions. And then too, part of it is justice. I think of research as justice. And this is my aunt who worked in social justice for the United Church of Christ for a big portion of her career. And I mentioned, my tribe is one of the We Are Damned Indians. So if you've read this book, this is what is said about the Garrison Dam. It is the single most destructive act perpetuated against an Indian tribe by the United States. So sometimes research can really be powerful, and research has the potential to bring about justice. So reeling it back even further in my people's history, a long time ago, my people were very active gardeners, and we were very good at gardening. We were so good at gardening that we were part of major trade centers. So here you see the Mandan Hiraza and the Arikara trade centers. Here's another map where our trade centers are being acknowledged. We had so much corn, squash, beans, sunflowers that we were able to trade with other tribes. And things changed. History, we ended up, the Garrison Dam had a huge impact. The moving to the reservations had a huge impact on our ability to garden. We also hunted, and so the history of our bison, and they experienced similar loss of land base or range, but I mean, their whole populations got decimated. And I mentioned our land bases. So this is my people's land. So in 1851, cut down in 1870, cut down again in 1880, and there you see the reservation in 1891. So just not only see our bison, you see the Mandan Hidatsa people, Rikra people. So part of it is justice, part of it is curiosity, or part of it is honoring all the sacrifices and knowledge that our ancestors, this is my grandmother and one of my grandmothers, and trying to think about what life was like for her and what hope she had for me. I know a lot of her prayers carried me through graduate school, because graduate school was rough, and she's holding my daughter. And so part of why I think for me research is important is for my children, but also our future generations, all those little ones that I will probably never even see in my lifetime. Another project that we completed here at my tribal college was to strengthen our humanities infrastructure. Part of that work was to digitize our special collections. We also used some of this funding to help with our traditional seed cache. So again, being able to do work that was really, really, truly relevant to my institution and to my people, and not just the historical and our ancestors, but thinking ahead to our future students, to our future tribal members, preserving both the language resources and other knowledges and our seeds so that they would continue to be available for generations to come. Another project that we're currently in the middle of is a partnership with the USDA and their Agricultural Research Service in Mandan, so the Northern Great Plains Research. And we are multiplying out the seeds that are held within our traditional seed cache at the college. So this past year, we grew out 8 varieties of corn. We have over 20 varieties of corn, but we had a harvest of over 28 gallons of seed. We grew out 7 varieties of squash, and we had over 500 squash. Our beans got hit kind of hard. We grew out 4 varieties, but we only were able to harvest half a gallon. We grew out 1 variety, traditional variety of watermelon, and we had over 150 watermelon. Our sunflowers just got decimated between the grasshoppers and the deer. We didn't have any seed that we were able to harvest for our sunflowers. So here's pictures of the actual varieties that we grew out, and I just love the diversity of our seeds. And I wish I could send you guys samples to taste. Like, this is the Arikara squash, and you don't need to add any sugar to this Arikara squash. And one of the things we did was we made fruit leather from this squash, and it's just very, very flavorful. The Hiradza squash is also super flavorful. It's not as moist, so it's more like a mashed potato, I guess I would say, as far as the texture goes. Our watermelon is maybe a similar size to the watermelon you see in supermarkets, but there's a great variation. Some of them are pretty sweet, and then some of them are very bland, and then some of them are a real pale pink, and then some of them are a darker pink. So this is just, I wanted to share some of the pictures of the diversity of seeds we have within our holdings. And again, part of being a scholar, part of being a researcher is you have a lot of power to think about the kinds of questions you're going to ask, the ways you're going to ask those questions, the methods that you're going to employ. So this particular project is based off of some of my experiences as a faculty member and also as a researcher. So the research we had done on Native American faculty in STEM fields. And a lot of times the professional development that is offered is, how can you write better grant proposals? How can you write more publications? And and this is my opinion, it feels like you're really feeding the system. They're just training you to be a better worker, which I suppose professional development is, but that isn't always what you need as an Indigenous scholar. It's different being an Indigenous scholar in academia. You're pulled in different directions. You have different responsibilities. You have a different identity. So of course it's going to be different for you. And so the professional development one of the things we wanted to explore was how can we modify professional development to really truly nurture us and our professional success and satisfaction. So we're in the process of putting together a professional development that integrates tribal languages, art, storytelling, connection to place, and hopefully is something that goes above and beyond diversity, equity, and inclusion trainings and can serve as a model that other institutions can use. So back to how do we do research? Part of it is with people, with community. You know, I showed you pictures of my students, and here's my daughter. So here's my youngest baby. And here's one of my grandmothers, and here's some of our Pawnee relatives. And so we were at this time talking about making traditional baskets. We were talking about traditional foods. We were talking about traditional seed keeping and how do we protect our seeds. So these were conversations that we had, which ended up influencing some of the research that we're doing now. Here's my older clan sister. So she teaches our traditional foods and gardening class. And here's some of our corn mortars and pestles. Here's some of our high school students. So how do we do the research? You know, we do it together. But sometimes there's gaps in our knowledge. So the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara people, we lived in earth lodges, and smallpox hit us really, really hard. We lost huge numbers of people in a very short amount of time. And so I think that's part of where we have some gaps in our knowledge. So I showed you the corn mortars and pestles. I think this project we did about 3 years ago. At that time, there was nobody in our communities that knew how to make corn mortars and pestles. They knew that we used them, and some people had some that had been passed down to them, but nobody knew how to make them. So we reached out to some of our friends in another tribal community, and they brought wood and they showed us how to make the corn mortars and pestles. They helped, they shared their knowledge with us so that we are able to continue to use those indigenous food technologies. And in the image you see they're making a maple sugar trough. So here's the maple sugar. It's a lot faster to do it in a KitchenAid, but it's pretty cool to be able to do it in a trough the traditional way. And I'll tell you what, it gives you a workout because you got to keep that sugar moving. You got to keep it going, going, going. And we would trade out. I don't know if they had one person making sugar at a time, but I think there was about 6 of us. And so we would keep pushing the sap back and forth until as it was crystallizing. And we would keep going. And then when we get tired, somebody else would come in and work on the sugar. So thinking about, why do we do the research? How do we do the research? And I mentioned one of the pieces of work that I am proud of being part of is the 6 R's of Indigenous research. So being able to be part of creating the literature that future scholars can draw upon. How do we do the research? We have our own epistemologies, we have our own principles, our own philosophies: respect, relationship, representation, relevance, responsibility, reciprocity. That's what we wrote about. And there were other scholars that we built on their work. And if you don't know Dr. Michelle Montgomery and Dr. Paulette Blanchard, you should check them out. They're amazing Indigenous women. And they wrote about also respect, relevance, reciprocity, responsibility. They included relatedness. relationships, redistribution. So similar principles, and they applied it to environmental inequities. Some other scholars who were interested in health disparities wrote about 4 R's: remember, reflect, restore, reclaim. The Buffalo Nation's Food System Initiative has their core values, and some of them are overlapping with ones I just shared. And then the American Indian College Fund, they gave a presentation about centering Indigenous relationality principles. And so there's the R's, and you've seen some of these being repeated: respect, responsibility, reciprocity, relationship, redistribution, reflection, remember. So just based off of those last few slides, reciprocity is huge. And how often do you see that in non-tribal research? How often is that one of the core values of the research? Respect, responsibility, relationships, redistribution. And again, I'm going to bring it back to our seeds, the work that we're doing at our college, thinking about that protection. I just wanted to, I'm starting to learn more about Indigenous data governance and just Indigenous data sovereignty. And so if you haven't heard much about it or read much about it yet, this is one article you can check out. And two of my esteemed colleagues that I greatly respect, Lydia Jennings and Dominique David Chavez, they are like right in there right now as far as goes with Indigenous data governance. So I want to leave some space for questions. Here in the background, you see my favorite flower bee balm, and in my hand, you see a wild turnip. And then oh shoot, it cut it short. Closing thought: gratitude, it's supposed to say gratitude plus reciprocity equals intellectual humility. And so that's the heart work. And that was a quote by Dr. Michelle Montgomery. So with that, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen, and I'm not sure if people can unmute.
We have the Q&A open for them to submit questions via the Q&A.
Oh, but I don't know how to find the Q&A.
Q&A icon on the bottom of your screen. It doesn't look like we've had any submitted now. We do have a moment now if anyone would like to send any questions. We have a few moments till we close out. Looks like we have no questions at this time, but a very active chat.
Well, I was just going through the chat. So there was a question. Casey asked, what is my tribe name? And I'm enrolled on the Fort Berthold Indian Reservation. And so that's the 3 affiliated tribes, the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara. I'm Mandan and Hidatsa. And then I'm also descended from the Fort Peck Sioux and Assiniboine. Oh, Elizabeth, thank you. since nobody's asking questions, I'm going to just give a comment. I had a maiden name, and then I got married, and I took my first husband's name, and then I got divorced, and I remarried, and I took my second husband's last name, and then got divorced. And then I decided, you know what? I've been carrying men's last names all my life. And Plenty Sweetgrass was one of my female ancestors on my mother's side. And She Kills was another female ancestor on my father's side. And so I took their two names and put them together. And that's how where my last name comes from. And if you ever get a chance to read about She Kills, she was a pretty BA. Oh, there's questions in the Q&A. Okay. Will I publish my accomplishments? I think I probably not. Richard asked, because that feels like breaking. How do we begin this conversation with our children? Oh man, I don't know. It's tough, especially on the reservation, because I feel like on the reservation, the K-12 school system, at least on my reservation, is just like they're treading water to get through. In higher education, so Marina asks, would you elaborate on the reciprocity? How would it be more specifically applied in higher education? I think trying not to just be extractive is one thing. So both in our research, but then two, on the demands that are placed upon students and diverse faculty and staff. Sometimes you want to be inclusive and you want to have that representation, but make sure that you're not making those asks in a way that's just extractive or added on top of duties, I guess, is one example. And then you can bring that over into the research and the communities. I think participatory action research is one non-Indigenous research paradigm that has a level of reciprocity. Tiffany, how do we use research to encourage relatives to go to college in our communities? Sometimes I wonder if our relatives are even aware of the research that we're doing in our communities. And because sometimes I feel like we can be in our own little bubble sometimes, and so we're not great at sharing the results of our research always. And I think we just recently had a food and seed summit, and we were sharing about the research that we were doing. So we did it in person, but we did it virtually, and people really got excited about that. And so I think making sure we share out and meet people where they're at is, I guess, one way of getting people excited about the work that we're doing. And I would hope that that would be one way of getting them into
And we are at time.
Oh, okay.
Nope. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Ruth. That was a very amazing insights and such an inspiring story. Many thank you to Dr. Ruth Plenty Sweetgrass-She Kills for her words and welcoming this evening. We greatly appreciate her time and the voices that she represents throughout her wisdom. So thank you so much again, Doctor. So if you have any more questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. We will get all of these questions over to our presenter so she has an opportunity to get back to you guys via email or just kind of follow up at a later date. This afternoon, before we go into our break, we just want to make a couple of announcements. So we will be hosting 3 online conference sessions today. So one session will be focused on growing your own intentionally by our career readiness and employment team. We will also have a session navigating mental health and a third session sharing the details and insights of setting up your schedule from a first-year student perspective. Our schedule is designed so that you have opportunities to attend the sessions that you find the most interesting twice. So one in this, and then first round session, and then another opportunity in the second round. But first, let's take a small break after our opening. Take a quick break to stretch your legs, get some water or some snacks so you guys can come back to your computers or wherever you're tuning in from today. Once we are all done with our 5-minute break, come back to this lobby, and then our first round of sessions will be approximately 50 minutes long. And then after that, we'll take another break as well. And we'll put these instructions in the chat. If anything comes up in the chat, if you're having issues with your camera, your audio, your picture, anything that happens, feel free to put it on the chat. We do have our tech team on standby. So we'll meet back on the main stage after our break. Thank you, everyone. Yeah.